Tico. Hi, everyone, for this amazing show that we just saw. To start the day with children is to give us hope, right? Yay! Okay, today is the day that we are gonna raise the billions. Uh, Buenos dias, bom dia, good morning. Welcome everyone to the 7th GLF Investment Case Symposium, Rewarding Nature, a Roadmap to Finance the Biodiversity. It is an event that is co-hosted by the Global Landscape Forum and the government of the Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. We are excited to have all of you here today with us and to see how we can explore innovative financial mechanisms. My name is Paloma Costa. I am a climate activist and lawyer from Brazil, and I will be your host for the day. First of all, I would like to thank the Instituto Nacional de Ballet Clásico for their incredible show and opening performance. As you all know, world leaders, experts, practitioners, local communities, Afro-descendants, and indigenous people have gathered here in Cali, Colombia, for the COP16, and to take action to protect this rich variety of biodiversity and socio-biodiversity that we have. But in order to do that, we need to raise the money. We need to raise around 200 billions a year. So that's our job for the day. And that's our challenge. Well, in the GLF Investment Case Symposium, we will explore investment opportunities that drive both financial returns and positive environmental impacts. And the outcomes of the discussions will shape a roadmap that will pave the path financing the Global Biodiversity Framework. The day is packed with experts, leaders, caciques, and sessions that will take place here in Cinematica, but also as well in the Teatrino outside, joined with workshops and different activities. Before we kick off our day, let's just go through some housekeeping. I know everyone wants the Wi-Fi password, right? Okay, let's share it now. The name, it's the 7th roadmap, and the password you can find in your credential. It is Think Landscape. It's easy to find. All in small letters, so it's okay. All sessions, they are going to be translated into English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And if you are using some device, please leave the device after you leave the room in the back. Coffee, tea, snacks, the food, the drinks, and so on, they will be served outside where we all enter. And our lunch will be around noon till 1. In addition to everyone joining us, we are also excited to have hundreds of people joining us online as well. And don't forget to use hashtag ThinkLandscape so we can all be connected. But last but not least, I also want to offer a special thanks for the donors, partners, and sponsors that made this conference true. So let's hear a shout out to the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the German Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety, and Consumer Protection, the International Climate Initiative, the Food Systems, Land Use, and Restoration Impact Program, the Global Environmental Facility, the Robert Bosch Foundation, the Arcadia Fund, and the International Model Forest Network with the Government of Canada. Thank you so much for your support to make through this day. Thank you. Well, but I know you are all excited for the discussions and not for me, So let's kick off with that. The discussion that we are going to have right now is mobilizing the billions. That's our job today, right? Pathways to achieving the Global Biodiversity Framework. That will be followed by an AI plenary titled, How is AI Revolutionizing the Finance? So it is my pleasure to give the floor to the moderator of this session, Mr. Onno van den Heuvel, who is the global manager of the UNDP's Biodiversity Financing Initiatives. So please join me now. Thank you.
Thank you, and also again, special thanks for those wonderful performances. That was a very inspiring way to start the day. And this session is actually going to consist of two parts. We're going to first look at the present, how we're doing right now on biodiversity finance. And then we're going to look at the future. What are options, opportunities, but also challenges? And this session is called Mobilizing the Billions, Pathways to Achieving the Global Biodiversity Framework. And we're going to look at a variety of different examples. We're going to look at public and private finance. We're going to look at indigenous groups. And we're going to look at a wide range of financial instruments that can help to bridge the gap. And I just would like to remind you to use the headset for the translation of English, Spanish, and Portuguese. And it was already mentioned that this event is supported by the government of Luxembourg. And we are really very honored to have with us, as a keynote speaker, Mr. Sergio Wilmes, the Minister of Environment of Luxembourg. So I would like to invite you now, please come to the stage to address us. Thank you.
Hola, bienvenidos a todos. But that's all for my Spanish, but I'm very honored to be here, and it's my first time that I'm here also in South America, and it's also the first time that this investment case symposium is now also in the Global South, because the other editions, 6 editions, were in Europe, the last one in my home country, in Luxembourg. So I'm a Minister of Environment, Climate and Biodiversity for 1 year now. And my first trip, when I became minister, was to the COP29, the climate COP. It was there where I also discovered, I have to be honest, the whole global event around climate, the fight against climate change and mitigation, adaptation. I was very impressed. And this is now my first COP on biodiversity. But back then, I had some bilaterals. I was struck by the fact that I know, because I'm a historian, that these are different COPs, but why we don't have more synergies also between the different COPs? Because they were all founded in 1992 here in South America, in Rio, in Brazil, at the Earth Summit. And I think, and I was talking to John before, and he said, if there is one key message, I'm joining him completely on that, and Luxembourgish government is also advocating for that, is that we have to find back the spirit of the Rio Earth Summit of 1992, and we have to work together on all levels. And that's also what GLF is doing. That's also what Luxembourgish government wants to do. Why? Because it's part of our policy making, but also because it's part of our DNA. Luxembourg is a small state. Perhaps it was luck that we still exist as a state, as a national state, but still we are a national state, but we are also a very open-minded state because we are so small. It's something that we need to do, always work together with our neighbors. And I think that we are one of the most international places also on Earth. So we are at one side a national state, but also a multinational state. So it's also in our DNA to work together in our daily life between all these people living in Luxembourg and coming from all over the world, even from South America, even Colombians, Brazilians, they live in Luxembourg. You will find the whole world gathered also in Luxembourg. So that's something that from child on, we have in our DNA, that we work together, that we want also to build bridges, historic bridges between France and Germany, in order that they don't fight against each other again, and because there were two world wars happening just there, between France and Germany, and Luxembourg was always in between. So that was our historic mission also with Belgium and other countries to bring them together again around the table. We founding member of the European Union, but now also because we also profited a lot of the economic wealth also and growth that Europe had known then after World War II, and we are now one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We know also that we have a huge responsibility because we have also a huge ecological footprint, and that's why we, at home, we do everything to preserve our biodiversity, to fight also climate change at home, to get CO2 emissions mitigate and also to adapt to climate change. But we know that's also part of our responsibility to fight it globally. And that's also why our government is investing a lot of public money also. For example, in this Biodiversity Framework Fund, the Global Biodiversity Framework Fund, that we pledged 7 millions. And these 7 millions will be used then also to leverage money from public sector. And we have a lot of initiatives also ongoing between the private sector and the Luxembourgish government in order to get this money together. And what's also very important for Luxembourg is that we have the co-benefits. It's not just return on invest, the classic one, economic one, but it's also the social, and I stress the social and the ecological benefit. And for us, local communities, indigenous people, also women, children, also strengthening their rights globally. It's very important. We want projects to become major in incubators, become bankable, to be invested, and then the money should then be used by local communities because they know how to preserve and conserve nature and how to manage sustainable nature and also their local communities. So that's what we want to do, and that's why we work together with GLF, for example, but also we have a common initiative, the Resilient Landscape Luxembourg. You would hear about this later on, and that's why I wish you here also now enjoy this morning, because you will have also then people who give you insight, who will show you that what are the projects, the current projects, the ongoing projects, and that it's possible. It's possible to work together, all of us, public, private, NGOs, local communities, and if we all work together and we show that it's possible, that this is not something that's just speeches, but it's actions, and we want to show you these actions, then I think we will also fight, and we will also then provide a sustainable future also for our children. I want to thank them for their unique performance here, because that's also what it's all about, that these generations also provide a sustainable future to our future generations. I thank you. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Minister, for these very inspiring words. I think you got it absolutely right to say that we have to bring back the spirit, the original spirit, back into the COP. And I think there's no better way to do that than by looking at action of people on the ground. And it's great if we have some representatives from indigenous groups here, because people always ask me, do you work on biodiversity? I say, no, I don't. But I'm trying to enable people who do that, which is indigenous groups, have access to finance and do this job of conservation on all our behalf. So that was a really great feedback. So we're going to start now with the first panel, and I will call out the panelists. So first of all, we have Ms. Kumi Kitamori, the Deputy Director of the Environment Directorate for the OECD. Please join us here. And we have Professor Martin Stuckley, the founder of the Land Banking Group, and we're going to hear more about that in a moment. And we are really thrilled to have Kleber Karipuna, an indigenous leader of the Karipuna people and the executive coordinator of the Articulation of the Indigenous Peoples of Brazil here. Hello? Just again, remind you all about the available headsets, unless you're proficient in 3 languages, you may need that. And also what will be very exciting is that we want to hear from you. So actually there is a system called Slido available, where you can actually share your questions. Of course, we're not going to have a lot of time, but we're going to pick one of those questions and share that with the panel. And just a request to maybe somebody to check this mic. Well, I'll just continue from here. So we're going to start with you, Kumi, and I just want to highlight that for us as UNDP, OECD is a really important partner at many levels. And so you have recently released a report on development finance for biodiversity. Can you tell us a bit more about what are sort of the main takeaways of that report?
So the doubling of development finance, official finance flow, is good news, but it's still not good enough. It's still not enough to reach at least the goal of at least US 20 billion per year for biodiversity-related development finance by 2025. So of course, much more needs to be done. Now, these numbers also highlight some trends, and let me highlight some of them. First, private finance, again, needs to be further mobilized through development finance, through leveraging. And despite the positive numbers that we talked about, the public finance for biodiversity mobilized through leveraging the development finance in 2020 was just $1.8 billion. Now, this represents only 3% of total private finance mobilized. Now, second, public international flows, such as ODA, that goes towards the core conservation activities, as stalling. Although such flows and such projects and activities have great potential, for example, for achieving the 30 by 30 target under the Global Biodiversity Framework. And finally, flows also show that nature stewards, such as indigenous groups and communities, still remain underfunded. So much further thoughts and alignment needs to be done to ensure that these global finance flows go to support such communities and groups to reflect better their concerns and also their wisdom and knowledge in such activities. So I just stop here in terms of the finding from this report. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So yeah, indeed, good to know that ODA is on the rise, but we're not at the level that we need, and indigenous groups are identified as being underfunded, and we're going to hear more about that in a moment. But now I would like to move to Martin. So with the land banking group Landler platform, how do you see nature equity as a financial mechanism can mobilize significant capital towards these big targets? What are you doing about that?
Thank you. Before I get there, just reflecting on this conversation, I'm sitting here asking myself, how will we think about this conversation in 10 years' time? And particularly, how will that wonderful ensemble of dancers and of young people be thinking about this conversation in 10 years' time? I think we are sitting in a really awkward spot here between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, sort of you're giving us those numbers, and they don't add up by any measure. Thanks, Kumi, for doing all the math for us. But we are short by almost an order of magnitude. And also, in the way GBFFF is slowly filling up, but also by magnitudes too short, in the way ODA is filling up, in the way philanthropy is stagnating, in the way some of those sparks of hope we had around private markets, they are not picking up. So we are short. And that is happening at a moment, and I'm just out of a conversation some weeks ago with 18 asset managers in New York, where behind closed doors, they're clearly saying, we get it, we absolutely get it. There is a tsunami of impairment risk running towards this economy that is that is apocalypse scale. So we do know that all our assets are overvalued. We do know that there are massive risks that are currently not priced into our economy, and there will be a moment of reckoning when all of that happens. And it's also that moment where we will be reckoning that nature is in fact this aggregate, this system that allows us to get all these adaptation services, all these ecosystem services, and all the risk mitigation that we need to keep safe as economies at very affordable terms. It's a huge arbitrage opportunity. And then you're sitting there and you wonder, why on earth aren't we tapping this opportunity that is economically so evident even today, and even in the absence of additional laws or standards? Why don't we do that? And then if you take a step back, and here sort of I took advantage of my many years sort of deep down in the engine room of our economy, you ask yourself, why are those who have this asset exposure, those institutional investors, the corporations, the banks, why are they not investing and helping to fill your gap? And the reason is that they are bound by market expectations, that they're bound by fiduciary obligations. They can't incur additional costs. What they can do, however, is to invest into assets that makes them future-proof. And so the question that we've asked ourselves, how can we get nature on the balance sheet, and how can we make it, which is much more logical than just paying our penalty or compensation to nature, how can we make it an investment into future benefits? Because that's what assets are about. And if you look into that, then very quickly you come to the conclusion that is not only philosophically, sort of that's where we are not philosophically right now, but it's also technologically that we just can't do that, and that we try to change. And we ask ourselves a very simple question: just imagine if we lived in a world where every pixel of the planet could hold an ecological passport. We call it a nature capital account, also to imply that this is consistent with UNC thinking. Now, and this nature capital account for every polygon, every plot of land, every community territory, if you can actually see how the biophysical nature capital is increasing or decreasing, and on the back of that you can then enter into contracts, a fair, equitable contract between a land steward, that can be a land fund, David, that can be an indigenous community, Kleber or Rami, who I'm just met, that can be any farmer, over those ecological, over that nature capital. Any uplift can be paid. Now imagine that was possible, and then imagine that these contracts indexed on nature actually qualify as an asset, so that you could put them on your balance sheet, that you have a better conversation with your bank because they know your risks are coming down, better conversation with your insurance, your risks are coming down, better conversation with your board because they see that you're investing into the future fitness of your company. And what would that then do on the other side, where then governments and standard setters could use that as a way to fulfill your capital adequacy requirements, because you have invested into better nature outcomes, so you have invested against your future risk, you have invested into against your new responsibilities, and would that create a currency on which we will be running our financial systems in the future? So turning nature into what it really is. We woke up we were all born, apart from the young children here, very much in an empty world where we still thought that nature is infinitely able to deliver, but now we are finding out that we have trespassed the regenerative capacity, and that's why we have to start treating it like a critical infrastructure that deserves to be reinvestable like any other infrastructure, and currently we don't have the financial infrastructure to do that, and that's the attempt that we are making, the contribution that we're trying to render with the technology that we have built, which you nicely called Ländler, which is an integrated nature capital assessment, management and investment system.
Thank you so much, and I do see already a pattern emerging that you too offer a glimmer of hope, in the sense that this is finally the loss of nature is recognized as a real, true, and in the future material risk. So that recognition is starting, but there's a long pathway to change that, to changing in finance flows on the ground. So a lot of work is ahead of us. Technology can help, and also we need to do much else. And so let's hope we can also find a glimmer of hope. Hearing from indigenous communities, so Kleber, I would like to turn to you. So of course, the real conservation work is actually carried out around the world by indigenous groups, but often the finance is not reaching groups like yours. And so how can we what are your ideas on how we could reach indigenous groups better with financing?
Obrigado pelo convite, a participação nesse espaço. Acho que é importante estarmos num momento como esse, num painel como esse, discutindo com a participação de povos indígenas, com a presença de indígenas que estão aqui na plateia e participando diretamente aqui do debate. Acho que é importante frisar que essa é uma discussão, por exemplo, sobre o financiamento direto para povos indígenas e comunidades locais, que está tendo basicamente como um compromisso político já a nível global, pela filantropia, pelos governos, pelos países, e a gente precisa agora transformar esse compromisso político em realidade na ponta, nos territórios. Muitos povos indígenas, muitas organizações, movimentos dos povos indígenas e comunidades locais estão, por exemplo, fazendo um processo de debate, de criação dos seus mecanismos próprios de fundos indígenas. Aqui eu trago dois exemplos que dialogam com essa tentativa, com essa busca de fortalecer o financiamento direto para povos indígenas e comunidades locais na ponta. A Aliança Global lançou recentemente uma plataforma chamada plataforma Xanja, que é uma plataforma para garantir a visibilidade dos mecanismos de fundos indígenas existentes em vários lugares do mundo. A própria Aliança Global, da qual a gente faz parte e reúne vários povos indígenas e comunidades locais, trabalham com diversos mecanismos de fundos em diversas partes do mundo. Na Indonésia, por exemplo, os irmãos da Indonésia, indígenas da Indonésia, têm um mecanismo de fundo no Zantara. Na Mesoamérica, o fundo territorial mesoamericano. No Brasil, recentemente, lançamos o fundo Jaguatá. Depois eu posso estar deixando com vocês para conhecer melhor a estratégia do fundo Jaguatá no Brasil, que é o fundo dos povos indígenas do Brasil, e há outros fundos indígenas sendo criados, e desde o chão do território, fundos menores a nível local, fundos macro-regionais a nível de regiões, a nível nacional, e nessa estratégia de se conectar a nível global com um grande ecossistema de mecanismos de fundos. Então, acho que é importante esses resultados desses debates, o próprio fundo da biodiversidade, com perspectivas aí de mais de 200 bilhões de dólares e 20% desse recurso sendo dialogado para ser destinado a povos indígenas e comunidades locais. Então, como que nós conseguimos, de fato, fortalecer, potencializar esses mecanismos de fundos indígenas que estão sendo criados e já estão funcionando, já estão operando, a serem também respostas para otimizar esse subfinanciamento que chega aos povos indígenas e comunidades locais, e os mecanismos de fundos indígenas poderem ser essa plataforma de potencializar, de fato, que esses recursos, que esses fundos cheguem nas regiões. Então, o que eu diria para todos nós aqui nesse debate também é que a gente consiga potencializar esses apoios, acreditem, confiem, os povos indígenas e as suas organizações, os seus mecanismos de fundos indígenas, alcançaram uma grande responsabilidade de gestão nos seus mecanismos próprios de fundo, e a gente precisa inverter agora esse subfinanciamento. Se os povos indígenas são reconhecidos como uma população um pouco mais de 5% a nível global e detêm e protegem mais de 80% da biodiversidade do planeta, essa conta está desproporcional, o subfinanciamento para povos indígenas e comunidades locais. Então, o que a gente precisa é trazer minimamente um equilíbrio e buscar valorizar, proteger, apoiar povos indígenas e comunidades locais que, historicamente, mileniamente, trabalham a proteção da biodiversidade do planeta para todos nós. Então, temos os nossos mecanismos de fundos que estão sendo trabalhados, sendo implementados, para que a gente consiga estar nesse debate sobre financiamento direto, e o apoio da filantropia, dos governos, dos países, né, da cooperação internacional, é de suma importância de todos vocês para otimizar, fortalecer e apoiar as ações diretas de proteção que os povos indígenas fazem mileniamente nos seus territórios. Então, é a mensagem que a gente gostaria de trazer e de deixar aqui nesse primeiro momento desse nosso painel. Obrigado.
Thank you so much for highlighting, the need to support indigenous groups and what we can do on the ground. Now we're going to go for a second series of questions. I'm going to go back to you, Kumi. So, development finance could represent around 15% of this famous 200 billion target, but what else do we need to really bridge a gap?
Thanks for the question. So, of course, development finance is important, it's vital, but by itself, it's not going to be enough to reach this $200 billion per year, that goal. So, of course, there are many things that different stakeholder groups can do, but let me just talk about governments, because that's what, who we work with at the OECD. So first, governments must lead by example. This means setting ambitious targets in the area of biodiversity policies, and also align their national budgets, public budget and financing towards supporting these goals. So, and there's, plenty of, it's clear, biodiversity is a public good. It supports our well-being, our economic activity, and social harmony, everything else, not just the ecological purposes. So it's really well justified to allocate government public government budget towards these goals. But typically, unfortunately, less than 2% on average across different governments, less than 2% of national public budgets are spent and allocated towards biodiversity activities. So that's something that different governments can address. Another thing is public spending on subsidies. There are biodiversity harmful public subsidies that are still ongoing in different areas. So governments can do, what they can do is to think about how to reform and redirect these public subsidy, their spending, towards something that's more biodiversity friendly. And at the OECD, this is something that we work on a lot. In the last COP15, we have released some guidance towards how governments can do this to reform and redirect their subsidies towards something that's more biodiversity positive. And another area, second area where governments can do is to also to help to mobilize private finance. And it's not just by de-risking private investment, and many governments do this through different mechanisms, but also setting and sending clear policy signals, because that's how private actors make decisions, follow the government policy signals to make their investment and financing decisions, both for consumers and producers, etc. Also, governments can use biodiversity positive incentives such as taxes and payments for ecosystem services and biodiversity offsets to set the tone and to deter harmful activities by private actors. And also, some of these incentives like taxes also generate revenues for governments. It's going to be something positive for the public budgets, which then the governments can use towards activities to support the biodiversity goals. Now, at the OECD, we have been tracking economic instruments and finance for biodiversity. And this work, tracking work, shows that biodiversity-related taxes generate some $11 billion, annually across the countries that we monitor. But that sounds like a lot, but it's still a very, very small fraction, only 1.3% of what we call environmentally related tax revenues that governments across the world are collecting and raising as public revenue. And now we are continuing this work to update our work on scaling up positive incentives for biodiversity, and we'll be very happy to share this with you all when it's ready early next year. So there's a lot that different groups can do, but there's a lot for governments, national governments, besides official development finance flows, that can do both in developed countries and developing countries. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Kumi. So there's indeed a lot that the government can do, and I think the journey to really integrate biodiversity into public financial management system is still in the early stages, but even though there's a lot of progress, there's much more that we must do to really make sure that we don't especially invest in anything that has a negative impact on nature. So Kleber, I would like to go back to you now. So as we already concluded, a lot of the existing financing mechanisms don't really integrate sufficiently the role of indigenous knowledge systems in biodiversity, and what can we do to improve that?
Bom, acho que é importante, como estava falando anteriormente, até reforçando o reconhecimento dos modelos de gestão dos povos indígenas é de suma importância para fortalecer com que os sistemas de conhecimento próprio dos povos indígenas sejam apoiados, tenham suas capacidades de serem apoiados. Acho que trabalhar investimentos a longo prazo também, a gente visa um maior investimento e um apoio de longo prazo, de mais longo prazo para povos indígenas e comunidades locais a nível global. Então, é importante também frisar que esse desequilíbrio no financiamento, o financiamento direto que nós discutimos, ele não é uma atividade fim, não deve ser somente o financiamento direto que deve ser a solução para o apoio aos povos indígenas, mas como que se garante isso ao longo prazo para a implementação das ações que são necessárias para apoiar a biodiversidade, a proteção da biodiversidade dos territórios indígenas, o reconhecimento dos territórios indígenas e fortalecer cada vez mais a estratégia de preservação e conservação. Os povos indígenas vivem em paz com a natureza, o tema dessa COP16 é paz com a natureza. Os povos indígenas já vivem em paz com a natureza milenarmente. Então, como que a humanidade consegue entender isso e, por exemplo, os apoiadores, os financiadores, entenderem também que estão financiando grandes empresas, grandes empreendimentos, grandes projetos econômicos que também impactam diretamente a perda da biodiversidade. E é desproporcional quem protege milenarmente a biodiversidade do planeta não ter o mesmo nível de investimento, de apoio direto para, pelo menos, reconhecer essa proteção, tirar o discurso do papel de reconhecer os povos indígenas, de reconhecer a biodiversidade e colocarmos na prática o apoio no contexto do financiamento direto e as ações que são necessárias para a proteção dos territórios indígenas, das unidades de conservação, das terras dos povos indígenas e comunidades locais. Então, se quisermos mesmo viver em paz com a natureza, a humanidade viver em paz com a natureza, acho que temos que começar a pensar nessa reversão dessa lógica de apoio que é feito hoje e os fundos que estão sendo anunciados, o Fundo da Biodiversidade, a gente vai ter no ano que vem no Brasil a COP de Clima, a COP 30, que também está se discutindo muito sobre o financiamento direto para povos indígenas e comunidades locais. Então, o que eu quero trazer aqui como mensagem para a gente viver em paz com a natureza acreditem, confiem, apoiem os povos indígenas através dos seus mecanismos de fundo. Como eu falei anteriormente, temos mecanismos já criados, como o Fundo de Aguatá dos Povos Indígenas do Brasil, a OPIAC, por exemplo, aqui na Colômbia, recentemente agora, lançou também seu mecanismo de fundo, e outros povos e outras organizações que têm seu mecanismo de fundo. A Aliança Global vem trabalhando através da plataforma Xandia a visibilidade desse mecanismo de fundo e a conexão entre esses mecanismos, nessa grande rede de ecossistemas. Então, o que a gente traz para esse debate é que a gente precisa equilibrar minimamente e superar esse subfinanciamento que vão para as comunidades indígenas e potencializar o financiamento direto na mesma proporcionalidade e parar de financiar empreendimentos que atacam a perda da biodiversidade e a gente equilibrar esse financiamento. Então, é um pouco da mensagem que a gente gostaria de trazer aqui nesse debate. Obrigado.
Thank you so much. So I think that you mentioned rightfully that indigenous groups are already living for a very long time in these areas, and basically these investments are in people's area where they reside, their homes, their houses, so to say. So if we were to invest in your home, don't you think we should ask first, you know, how things are run here and consult with the inhabitants? I think it should be a no-brainer, but we know it's not yet the case. But there are examples out there of better models. So let's hope that we're going to look at those more closely and that we can scale them up. And thank you for sharing those. All right, so now we're going to turn to you, the audience, and we're going to see what questions that you have put up, and there should be appearing here on the screen. So let's see if that is coming, and what are the things that you're curious about. So we're going to pick one or two questions and go back to our panel. I think we're slightly behind time, so let's go a very short and punchy point. So I think I'm just going to pick the last one about effectiveness, because we talked about the finance gap, but also how can we do actually better with the money that we already have? So what are the things we can improve in the current investment model? So let's start with you again, Kumi. What ideas do you have around effectiveness?
Thank you very much. So in this very short time we have for this conversation, I talked about what we do at the OECD's Development Assistance Committee as a tracker of information and as OECD's role as the data and statistical source. But numbers not all we do. In addition, we also do a lot of policy dialogue and sharing of best practices and case studies amongst different governments that we work with. So we do have, although I don't have time to go into it, we do have I lost the question on the screen, but we do have cases of how some of this money is flowing in and into concrete examples of case studies of different types of projects and how they're effective in reaching the ultimate goal that we are looking at. Thanks.
Great point. So we got those numbers, but also what in the end is done with it is just as important. So going back to you, Martin, what are your ideas on how we can be more effective with the money that we're investing?
Look, I think we are having this discussion at a particular moment where we are given a gift from technology that wasn't available in the past, which allows us to do a couple of things that are meaningful. They allow us to move to outcome-based systems, so we can measure nature capital and we can see whether it gets better or whether it is deteriorating with regard to biodiversity stocks, with regard to water, with regard to soil, with regard to the condition of our carbon stock. So we are now able to see whether this is happening, and in a way that is also affordable and accessible, and not just to some very potent project developers, but it's now democratized. It's available to everyone in a way that is trusted and affordable. And the second thing that we are given now, so that is the nature tech innovation through Earth observation, through metagenomics, through soundscaping, through image recognition, and through, of course, machine learning and AI that allows us to do this in a way that we can increasingly trust. That's important. The second thing that's more in the financial side, there is a new movement which goes more to decentralized and regenerative form of finance, and that is important also listening to you, Kleber, because that allows us to pull those who are giving us what we need to thrive as economies, as companies, as societies in the future, those eco-guardians, those land stewards, those communities, those foresters, those farmers, those land funds, to pull them from the fringes of the economy into the center of the economy and give them a right and opportunity to play and to be rewarded in a way that is fair and dignified. And so we are giving them some of the autonomy back to be a real player, not to be just disintermediated by others, but to play an active role and to reward them for what they are giving us in terms of water, biodiversity, carbon storage outcomes. So this is, in terms of effectiveness, this is a big step forward, and it's not just I think it's a real paradigm shift to move towards these outcome-based systems where many, many years ago we already said we need to steer our economies not just by GDP, we also need to look at the way our total stock of capital develops, and that's not just financial and produced capital, that's also social, human, and particularly and most undervalued, that is natural capital. And so if we were steering ourselves as societies into a future where we are maximizing that capital, that would be a good future, but then we also have to break it down into every portfolio, into every value chain, into every economic decision that we do, and that I call effectiveness. That's a gift that is technology now giving us that we should take with both hands.
It's a great point that actually the beauty of biodiversity, that it's totally different everywhere, but that presents a challenge in terms of impact measurement. And even biodiversity can be on the move, actually. So you may want to measure certain biodiversity values, but species, of course, roam around freely to the landscape. So this is not an easy thing to measure, but we have technology to help us, and there's more we can do. So it's a great point. And Kleber, what would you like to share? How can we do more with the funding that we already have for indigenous communities? How can we make more positive impact with the funding that's available?
Acho que nós não temos muito tempo, né? Os painéis mesmo aqui são muito corridos, 3, 5 minutos. Nós não temos muito tempo mais para salvar a humanidade. E eu falo nós, todos nós, povos indígenas, comunidades locais, né, as pessoas que se comprometem, que querem, de fato, ajudar. Então, o que a gente quer trazer de mensagem, nesse pouco tempo que nos resta, seja aqui no painel, seja no tempo que a gente tem para correr, para proteger a nossa futura geração, é que a gente consiga trazer um equilíbrio, né, diante de todo o avanço tecnológico, de todo o avanço do debate político que já foi feito, né. Acho que nós temos já resultados concretos das discussões feitas para entender qual que é o problema. E agora a gente precisa pôr a mão na massa. E pôr a mão na massa, nesse debate sobre financiamento direto, é dar oportunidade aos povos indígenas, né, no apoio direto aos seus mecanismos de fundo, às suas organizações, né, é dar oportunidade de nós continuarmos, né, fazendo o que fazemos milenarmente, que é proteger toda a biodiversidade do planeta, né, e reconhecer mais territórios indígenas, né, para que a gente consiga, né, ter um caminho, né, de direção para a salvação, para a proteção e para, de fato, todos nós vivermos em paz com a natureza. Todos nós, povos indígenas, comunidades locais e toda a humanidade. Então, acho que essa é a direção que nós queremos, né, trazer aqui para esse debate e, né, ganhar a confiança de todos, né, de todos vocês nesse debate sobre financiamento direto e sobre os mecanismos de fundos indígenas, né, que existem já operando e que, né, tem como dar uma grande contribuição para todo esse processo junto aos povos indígenas e comunidades locais.
Thank you so much, and you're absolutely right that there's never enough time to discuss, but I think we have hundreds of people listening to your story right now, and we hope they'll be inspired, and they'll change their thinking about what we can do to support indigenous groups and work with them, and learn more also online. So you're right that we have to move to action, and so with that also I think I would like to wrap up this panel where we've seen some really important glimmers of hope, but most of the work is ahead of us rather than behind us. So let's start now to the second segment where we're going to look ahead. So I would like to thank you all for joining us here, and please go back to your seat as I call out people for the second segment. Thank you so much. A big applause, people.
Hi, everyone. We're just wrapping up the first plenary with a brief discussion about the way forward, where do we go from now, and I would kindly invite Mr. David Brandt on stage right now, who is the Executive Chair of New Forests and Founding Chair of the International Sustainable Forestry Coalition. Thank you, Mr. Brandt. I would also like to welcome Mr. Gilmer Yuimashi Castro on stage, who is the Vice President of Bariuesna and also coordinator of GLF Pichis Pachitea chapter. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Thank you. let's start with Mr. David Brand. I would like to just invite you to talk a bit about the institutional mechanisms that we can have to fund biodiversity. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks very much. It's great to be here with you all and to talk about how we can drive more investment into conservation of nature and doing that in a way that we can support Indigenous people, local communities, and even link that with climate solutions. So the first thing I'll say is, you know, as I understand it, where we stand today, about $7.5 trillion is in government subsidies and in investments that are actually destroying nature or impacting nature negatively. So the first thing we could do, of course, is try to reduce some of that $7.5 trillion. But we have a $100 trillion global economy. There's a huge amount of capital out there, and the challenge really is how to harness that capital to do good instead of to cause these impacts. And so about 18 months ago, we had a call of all of the major CEOs of the forestry sector around the world, and we made the case that the forestry sector manages tens of millions of hectares of land. It engages with Indigenous communities all around the world, with local communities, creates rural jobs, has a huge role in terms of the transition out of things like petrochemicals and into sustainable materials. And how can we do more? How can we make a bigger contribution to nature conservation, to climate, to social justice and community development? And so we founded an organization called the International Sustainable Forestry Coalition, and we're trying to create a systems change within the forestry sector where we become, in a sense, a natural capital asset class, where our purpose is not just providing sustainable, renewable materials, but we're also going to be looking to have net positive gain on nature, climate solutions, adaptation, new partnerships and support for Indigenous and rural communities, and in a way that will actually grow the sector. And so that's been our work over the last year and a half, getting organized, developing a strategic plan, identifying some of the key areas that we want to work on. And so as an example, my company, New Forests, we manage about $8 billion. We manage 4.3 million hectares of land around the world, 9 countries I think we operate in. Our clients are these large institutional investors, pension plans, reinsurance companies, foundations, endowments, sovereign wealth funds. Some of these investors have portfolios of $500 billion to $1 trillion, and so they are called universal investors. They invest across everything. And so we have to get these guys on board. They have to understand that their portfolio not only generates risk and return, it has climate impacts, it has nature impacts, it has social impacts, and we need to reorient that money so that it can actually be refocused. We can reallocate what the portfolio invests in, and then we can reselect which investments within those different portfolio elements are going to be most beneficial to the world. And that process is starting. We have clients now who have made the commitment to become net zero across their investment portfolio in alignment with the Paris Agreement. Now, some, not many, but it's starting to see some also say, well, how do we now become nature positive as well? And so we need to start organizing these investments so that we can report back up to these investors to let them know if they're winning or losing. And then they can start to say, well, these asset classes are giving us positive biodiversity benefits. Let's put more money into that. These are causing impacts. Let's take money out of those. And when they do that, they can run their portfolio model and show that they can have little effect on the risk-adjusted return, but now can start to be able to demonstrably have positive biodiversity outcomes. And just I'll end with a couple of examples of some of the deals that we're doing that are showing the path to this. In Tasmania, we're the largest landowner. We have acquired an asset that had about 80,000 hectares of pine plantation, and then, or eucalyptus plantation, and about 80,000 hectares of natural forest. When we took that over, the forest had been logged quite a bit, so we put it all under conservation management. We still operate the forestry plantations to produce timber. We then engaged with the local indigenous community and reestablished indigenous land management practices across that 80,000 hectares of natural forest. We started to reestablish indigenous burning regimes and started to restore some of the habitats that had been lost. We then started to develop a natural capital accounting system across that land base, and that allowed us to demonstrate that the value to society of the conservation component was 2 or 3 times the value of the timber plantations, and yet it was unpriced. And so it just sort of demonstrates the opportunity that we have if we can get this right. And then my last example is in Asia. We have a Tropical Asia Forest Fund. It's a blended finance structure. So we have about $100 million of investment capital, about $50 million of concessional capital. We blend that all together. It allows us to really supercharge our work on biodiversity, climate solutions, and community development and engagement. That means that a third of the capital of that investment vehicle is going into activities that benefit nature, cause climate solutions, but don't need to have any return. But it's embedded with these commercial investments so that they're perpetuated over long periods of time. So I think there's hope there in terms of trying to scale these type of investments up and drive more capital into things that do good rather than to things that are drawing down on nature. Thank you.
Yeah, no. Thank you so much, Mr. Brand, and thanks for sharing those examples and also highlighting the importance of investing with impact, which is surely something we should do. Now, moving on to Gilmer. Gilmer, te haré la pregunta en español y me gustaría invitarle a hablar un poco de los retos para financiar a proyectos de biodiversidad en territorios indígenas y también ya uniendo a la segunda pregunta, ¿qué lecciones y qué ejemplos de éxito podrías compartir con nosotros?
Bueno, luego de haber escuchado todas las exposiciones de los compañeros del hermano de Brasil, bueno, en este caso es que hemos visto, nosotros venimos de Ucayali, muy lejos, del indígena pueblo Shipibo-Conibo, ¿no? En este caso es que para que los proyectos tengan un objetivo claro, todos los proyectos que se haga con las comunidades nativas en la Amazonía tienen que ser directamente trabajado con las comunidades en este caso, porque muchas veces los proyectos que se van es que se va desde arriba hacia abajo. Entonces, tiene que ser los proyectos de abajo hacia arriba. ¿Cómo queremos trabajar como pueblos indígenas en este caso? Porque muchas veces puede fracasar y no puede haber nada de algo positivo, ¿no? Y otra de las cosas que quiero también mencionar es que como Bariusna hemos podido trabajar en 2 años, 910 hectáreas. Hemos sembrado casi 1.040.000 plantones gracias al apoyo de One Tree Plante en este caso, porque es una de las financieras que sí ha podido llegar. Nosotros estamos trabajando directamente con las comunidades de 3 pueblos indígenas, del pueblo Shipibo-Conibo, el pueblo Asháninka y el pueblo Yanesha. Y eso, invitamos que no tengan miedo de aportar, de apostar directamente con organizaciones locales, porque muchas veces estamos escuchando de que hay mucho dinero para el tema de cambio climático, pero esos recursos no llegan donde estamos, porque nosotros sí necesitamos los recursos para poder trabajar con las comunidades indígenas en la Amazonía peruana. Gracias.
Listo, muchas gracias. Por favor, aplausos para nuestros panelistas. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much. We are going to move forward with the last segment of the plenary. I would like to invite Mrs. Thank you. Yes. I would like to do a short announcement. We are welcoming today a new charter member for the Global Landscapes Forum. And I'm very thrilled to share that IPAN, Amazon Environmental Research Institute is joining us. We have the Director of Science of IPAN here, Anne Alencar. Anne, please, welcome to join the stage and share a few words with us. Thank you.
It's an honor to be here and honor to receive those words from you. For us, the GLF, the Global Landscape Forum, is a very important, innovative initiative and has for years talking about how it's important to think about the landscape and how to integrate land use change with, for example, community knowledge to have a better management of these things. So I think as someone working in an organization such as IPAN, which is a research applied organization to conservation agenda in the Amazon and Cerrado, I think it's really important to have money, you know, because we're talking about really understand what is one of the most important richness of the world, which is the biodiversity. In Brazil, for example, every 2 days, people find a new species. And look, we don't have a lot of investment in researchers to go to the field to find a new species every 2 days. If we had, maybe we find every minute, you know. So, and this is, we're talking about the Amazon, one of the most biodiverse places in the world, but there are many other places in the world that we don't know about how the biodiversity, how much is the biodiversity. We don't know the potential of the total biodiversity. So mobilizing finance for that is fundamental. Of course, we have to take care with some things, you know. I really think that money is not the problem. And it's not the problem because people are losing money because of climate change. People are losing money because biodiversity is in disharmony somehow. So, yeah, people maybe are willing to put some money, to invest some money, to reduce their risk to lose money. However, we need to make sure that the money that is mobilized for conservation and also save biodiversity and support cultures that help to save biodiversity really takes to the place. We had here 2 guys from representatives from indigenous communities that really were pointing that. So that is very, very important. And also, it is important that the new technology, the support that these financial can give to new technologies such as AI, we just had a panel, amazing panel on it, really creates the conditions for us to understand better the biodiversity, to monitor better, to actually trace better what is going on with the people that are using the biodiversity, and be able to actually use that technology in a way to conserve really biodiversity and not create more inequalities. Because AI can really have this potential, you know, because not everybody knows, even if you think everybody has a cell phone nowadays, but maybe not everybody has connectivity. So we really have to work on these 2 issues, like finance, how to mobilize finance, make this finance really gets to the ground, and to support the real initiatives that will keep the strategies for conservation and from saving biodiversity in place, and also the culture of the people that really deal with biodiversity every day, but also holding, in a way, artificial intelligence that really can, we used to say in Brazil, jogar conosco, which really plays with us in the face of conservation and in the face of these new challenges that have been posed to us by climate change. So thank you.